to go. Awesome. Welcome everyone to Heart-Centered Money Conversations. I am so excited to be here. This episode is for you if you're looking to find a solution that's going to last to make sure that you're hitting your financial goals and they're matching with your values. And that ultimately is going to help you create the life that you want. This episode is going to be, honestly, I have been waiting for this one. So, for those of you who don't know me, I am Kristen Mabee. I am a financial coach here in Ontario, and I am here with my friend Laura Plahuta, who is the founder of Reignite Your Soul and is an energetic alignment coach. And today she's really going to dive into all of the things that I see with my clients around mindset and why we're not hitting our financial goals. And so if you have a financial goal that maybe has been on the list and you've been working on it for a while, this episode is for you. For those of you who have caught our last episode all about the first home savings account and the home buyers plan, I'd love to hear in the comments the values that you took home from that and what action steps you took to make a step forward if buying a house is in your path. And so I think it's so interesting because we talked about how you have to adapt in life. Life doesn't always go the way that we want. And just figuring out what we want and how to get there sometimes isn't enough. And sometimes it's the mindset around it. And so I am so excited to hear about how we can align the values and the habits that we have to hit our goals. Because Laura, I tell you, I see a lot of the times with my clients that they have goals, but they're not hitting those goals. And I know that they're capable of so much more. And I know it's a lot around the mindset around money. So I love if you can share with us more about how we can hit these goals and what we can do to have a solution that's going to last, because ultimately that's what we're all looking for.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. I'm super fired up for this episode as well. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because we all go through transitions, and in those transitions, obviously, things change. And for anybody that maybe you don't really know much about the mind, how humans operate, sometimes it's like the computer's a little bit slow, right? It's a little bit slow to kick it into gear into the way that we want to go, and we stay on this like pattern of like old habits and old behaviors that keep us kind of stuck, like straddling two lives per se, right? Like we're living the old life that we already created, but then we have this new vision for what we want, and we're straddling both, right? So people will come to you and they're like, yeah, I want this. But then all of a sudden it's like, boom, right back in that old reality of like going through the motions of where you already are. So it's definitely it's a journey to be able to then get from where your mind, your natural operating system is naturally going to take you to this direction opposed to this direction, right? So there's a bit of a lag there. So the first thing that I'd love to talk about is like the awareness around it. Like that's really the biggest thing, is like when we have awareness around the fact that we're procrastinating around something, or that we're not following through on something, or we have a desire, we see this kind of new reality, but we're just not getting there. Like we're doing what we know. But there's just things sometimes that we don't know that we need to implement or change that will then get us there, right? So the first thing is always going to be the awareness around it. So if you're kind of recognizing that there's somewhere where you want to go, but you don't really know how to get there, right? The educational piece is huge. So you have a step-by-step plan of getting there, but then also like recognizing our own thought patterns that hold us back, the stories that hold us back, right? The emotional patterns, maybe a lot of fear can come up when it comes to finances, where sometimes we want to stay the same, right? And understanding the mind too, like human minds are literally naturally programmed to keep us safe.
Mm.
Right. And I think when we can kind of understand that and recognize that, like we kind of ditch the shame and we ditch the guilt we may feel for not following through on things. And as soon as we can ditch those emotions, it makes things a lot easier to begin with, to make changes to start.
Yeah. And that was our whole start to this whole series that we're doing was leave the guilt and regret, shame at
Mhm.
the door because we don't know what we don't know, and
Mm,
the way that we feel about different things is sometimes it's like you said, the stories in our minds. So I love you, love you for grounding us into that, right?
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And another thing too, when it comes to really like having those belief shifts, like we only know what we know, right? And so
Yeah,
a lot of the time when we aren't actually achieving what we want to achieve, we have to ask ourselves the question, is it something that we actually want?
totally.
Because a lot of the time it's like it may be our parents that drilled it into us when we were children that this was something that we needed to be successful, or that this was a part of our plan for our life. Like we needed to go to university or we needed to go to college in order to have a successful job. Whereas now you can make a lot of money, a lot more money doing stuff online, right? It's like that was not maybe something that was drilled into you right when you were this at
Yeah.
the start. So it's not even maybe something that you're even open to, right? So there's always
Mhm.
going to be those kind of um, bringing awareness to, I like to call them borrowed goals, like things
Yeah, it's
that
a good term.
for me, like those borrowed goals was kind of like a lot of the time when we talk about like spiritual awakenings, everybody kind of goes through different awakenings throughout their life, different transitions. But a lot of the time it can
Mhm,
happen when something traumatic happens in your life or a relationship ends or whatever. And for me, that's what it was, right?
mhm.
When my relationship ended of 6 years, I had the house, I had the dogs, I had the vehicles, I had everything, like the material
Yeah,
stuff. And it was just because that's what my family had kind of painted the picture, and culture and society and everything, movies, all of these things kind of paint that picture as being like this, like
yeah.
this golden timeline that if you can do this in your lifetime, then you've done it, you've made it.
Yeah,
Right? But then you kind of
yeah,
sometimes get there and you're like, shit, like this isn't actually making me happy, or this isn't like fulfilling me. And so sometimes we can kind of be going along that where you're ticking off all of these check boxes and you're
mhm.
not actually fulfilled, right?
Yeah,
Or you're just going through the motions and you're staying comfortable in a life and you're not actually going for the things that you truly want when it comes to goals, right?
yeah. I
They're kind
think
of
it's
like,
really interesting too, because sometimes it's even just the pressures, like the external pressures
yeah,
that you hear all the time, that even when you've made a decision that maybe isn't aligned with the societal goals, that people are like, oh, you'll change your mind.
for
Like, for
sure.
an example, like Jesse and I don't want kids. I have known since I was 21 years old that I didn't want kids, and even now people are like, oh, it's really unfortunate, or you'll change your mind. I'm like, really? I don't think so.
Totally,
And so I
yeah.
think just like being bold enough to stay true to your goals and what you want is definitely like may require a mindset shift, because like there's
Mhm.
gonna be people that are gonna push you in one way or another, right? If you're
Yeah,
doing something outside of the norm. Actually, I just had a really good conversation about this last night. But if you're doing something outside the norm, there's always gonna be somebody that's questioning
yeah,
what you're doing and if it's the right thing for you. And only you
100%.
know what's the right thing for you.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's exactly it, right? Like, we know best what is for us. Like
Yeah,
our dreams, our goals, our interests, our desires were put inside of us for a reason, and it's
yeah,
up to us to really, like, trust ourselves to navigate our lives and create our lives, and there's always going to be people on the outside that like to share their opinion, and I'm really
yeah,
noticing a lot lately, a lot of it comes from it's like a caution, It's like
Mm,
it's meant with the best intentions because people don't want you to go through the same experiences that they went through.
yeah.
Right? But understanding that it's like just because one person went through that and that was the way that their life went, that doesn't mean that that's going to happen to you. And it's just like really trusting yourself to navigate life. And we all learn through experiences too, right? So it's
Yeah.
like really just trusting yourself to be able to make decisions and be open to being a student,
Yeah.
like, and it really takes, like, you have to really put your ego aside to be like, okay, no, like, I'm open to learning because there's so many childhood triggers and childhood wounds where we felt like we had to prove ourselves or we felt like we had to know what we were talking about. And if we were wrong, then, oh, there's something wrong with us. And like, we can't be wrong. Like, oh my gosh, lie about it until so that they still think that you're right
Don't
or
tell
argue about it. Like, you
again.
can never like
Yeah.
pretend that you're actually wrong about something. So,
Yeah. I'd actually love to hear in the comments about something that maybe you went against the grain on, something that you saw somebody fail and then you succeeded, or somebody
mm,
told you that you couldn't do and then you did it anyways and it was the best decision of your life. I
yeah.
would love to hear in the comments what that thing is for you and how it's going, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and life throws us curveballs.
Yeah.
And we were talking
To
about
say.
that on the last episode as well. It's like life can change on a dime, and then all of a sudden you're a homeowner,
Yeah.
or all of a sudden you have a
Here we
baby.
are. Yeah.
Or all of these things. And it's like understanding that there is going to be that lag time for us to be able to process things and like be able to be patient with ourselves enough to be able to make the changes that we need to change and just continue going forward, knowing it's not going to be a pretty line. It's going to just be messy as F. And
Yeah.
there's a meme thingy on Instagram I see often where it's like what you think life is going to be, and it's like this straight line, but it's like what
Yeah.
it actually is. It's like,
All over the place.
and when you look back at it, you're like, that makes total sense. Duh, like no, no,
Yeah.
no wonder I took that path. Look at all the stuff I learned, and I became who I am through that journey. But then, like, when you're like looking forward, you're like sometimes like, oh my God, like how am I ever gonna get through this? Or like this
Mm.
isn't the way that I thought it would be. And it's just like, it's not a straight kind of line. It's figuring it out as
Yeah.
you go.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the habits or some of the adjustments people can make to, have those things more aligned that, if, life is going to be all over the place, but like, what can I do to, kind of get to my goal, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's the answer? Tell me the secret.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's not going to be to do with money at all. Like a lot
Yeah.
of it is our own well-being. How
Mm,
healthy are we? How emotionally
yeah.
regulated are we? How
Yeah.
able am I to be able to deal with stress so that when something pops up in life, I'm not just like, oh my God, this is the end of the world. I'm more
Yeah.
like, okay, like, let's freaking go. Like, what are some solutions? Like, universe, like, bring it on. Let's go. Like,
Yeah.
bring me some answers here. I'm going to go out in nature and I'm going to go for a walk and ask the trees.
Yeah.
It's like just really just shifting our mindset around that it's always going to be different, and the way that we feel in our bodies and in our minds, the way that we fuel our bodies, like with good food, with
Mm,
getting out in nature, with making sure that we're doing the things to be able to regulate ourselves emotionally. We're meditating, we're doing yoga, we're doing whatever the things are that make us feel good. Everybody has different things that make them feel good, but there are like legitimate things that are proven to
yeah.
make you feel better, right? So
Yeah.
if that's not a part of your current lifestyle, then that may be something that you want to start diving into because the better we feel, the more patience we have, the more ability we have to be able to decision make, to problem solve, to be able to set a goal and to actually achieve a goal. A lot of
Yeah.
it does come down to our ability to manage stress because if we're in fight or flight, and our body is literally just looking at survival mode, you know,
Yeah.
it's not going to be thinking of those other things like, I want to be able to have financial security for my family. Or maybe it's desperately wanting it, but it's not able to have the follow through around it. So I would say the biggest thing would be like, ask yourself the question of like, am I feeling good in my body emotionally? Am I completely
Mhm.
like, do I get reactive or triggered a lot with other people? Or when situations come up, like, do I find myself getting caught in loops of anger or fear or
Mm,
frustration a lot? Right. Because when we're in those states, like, we literally don't have the capacity, like, our brain is in a completely different area. Like,
yeah.
like, it's functioning from a completely different place than it needs to be able to be somebody who's a high performer and somebody who's like setting goals, taking action, feeling good, and not doing it in a way that's like kind of like I like to think of it as like the old school way where you're like all action oriented, but then you're really burning yourself out and killing yourself slowly.
Yeah, it's
It's
actually
the
really
balance.
interesting. I have a friend who has gone through so much life in the last couple of years, and I talk to him often about how you need to settle down and process those emotions because he makes a really solid income, but he drowns himself in work instead of processing the
Yeah.
emotions. And it's like if you don't process those emotions, I always talk to him, I'm like, those are just gonna come up later in a different way, right? And
Mhm.
then it's gonna be 10 times worse.
For sure, yeah. And
I
it's
know, like,
interesting when it comes to that because like emotional, like we never talked about that stuff when we were young. You
right.
know, and like when you think about the mental beliefs that we have that emotions are weak, especially for men, you know, if you show your
Mm,
emotions, you're weak, you're
yeah.
pussy, you're whatever the words are that people want to call people that
Yeah.
are actually show their
Man up,
emotions,
you
right?
know? Like,
And even with
yeah.
women, because we've been raised in this society that is very like, we want our independence. We don't want to have to rely on somebody else. We
Yeah.
have shut down a lot of that feminine piece. And when you look at like the kind of spiritual and like cultural kind of stories, when you look at indigenous kind of stories, there's a lot of like one that I can think of. I can't remember which um where it actually came from, but it's about the condor and the eagle. And the eagle is more like the
Mhm,
masculine energy and the condor is the feminine. And it says
mhm,
that like right now we're in this time of like the merging of the two, where when the eagle
mm,
and the condor fly together and it's bringing that balance to the world. And
mm,
it's happening, you know, even in the greater scheme of the world, that's happening, but it has to start within
mm.
us where we're balancing that taking care of ourselves on a deep, nurturing, emotional level
Yeah,
as well as still being able to like kick ass and be able to like take action and do the things that we want to not have to settle for
yeah.
things in life. So it's like really like balancing those two.
Yeah, I think that word of settling is it's huge, and I think it's so predominant right now because we're in a state where we have so many opportunities ahead of us,
Yeah.
and it's so easy to just settle for comfort. But I actually talk about it in the budget guide about what's easier, like just settling for a life that you don't want, or just taking the steps to move forward and
Yeah.
actually having a life that's fulfilling, right?
Mhm.
And it's all about that balance because if you don't have that balance, then you're not going to be able to create that life that you're actually looking for, which is
Mhm.
huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a saying that says choose your hard. And it's like that
Yeah.
comfort zone that when we stay in it, like it can be really challenging when you know that you have dreams and
Mhm.
goals and you're not taking action on them. That place frickin' sucks, you
And
know,
it
but then it
feels heavy
also,
because you're like, why am I not doing this? Why am I not
right?
taking the action? Like,
Uh,
should I be in this relationship? Should I be here? You're always questioning yourself.
yeah,
And it's like, that's hard.
yeah.
Because if you're always questioning yourself, like, you're never going to be happy.
And then you start believing those limiting stories too, eventually over time, like you start believing them.
Yeah.
And that's literally like what depression is, right? It's like you're just so far into that loop of like believing those stories when that's only one of the scenarios. You know, like
Yeah.
that's why the power of our thoughts is so important because what we
Mhm.
believe, we receive, right?
Right. Yeah.
So if we start believing those stories, and it's not just as easy as being like, oh, well, I don't want to believe them anymore, switch it, change it, because there's a whole emotional pattern underneath that's holding us in that story, right? The
Yeah.
fear becomes safe. The
Yeah.
heavy emotions become safe, and then that's where our brain kind of keeps us, right? So there's a
Yeah.
whole like unwinding that has to happen between that. But then it's also hard when you're starting to reprogram these new patterns, right? Like when I used to show up on these, and even still sometimes, like my body's like, oh my God, like, no, like there's people on the other end that are like gonna tear you apart on the other end and like puts me
Mm.
into fear. And I just want to like, okay, I'm just not gonna go on here anymore.
Let's just avoid it.
Right? But it's just a
Other than
voice in the
that.
head of fear, right? So it's like that's also
Yeah.
hard to be able to show up and work through those patterns and not know that you're not going to show up 100% every single time, but you continue trekking along and eventually that operating system
Mhm.
clicks over and then this now feels safe, right? So it's like
Right.
knowing that both of them are going to be hard, but it's like
Yeah.
choosing our hard and then going for it. And the one thing that
Yeah.
like really keeps me going, it's like I don't want to be sitting at the end of my life looking back with all of these regrets. Like I would rather live my life being like, yo, I freaking gave it my all. I like had a hell of a
Yeah.
time like moving through
Yeah.
all of that. So that was a wild journey,
Yeah.
like that was intense. It was wild. It was crazy. I felt everything and I wouldn't do it any differently because it
Yeah.
was
It's
exhilarating and it was
exactly what I
just
wanted
like,
it to be.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think that actually brings me to another point about, you and I were talking about like your values around money and how, what you spend your money on shows your values.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes when you're making those purchases, there can be a lot of regret around things and you're not getting to where you want to be that way. Do you
Hmm.
mind diving into that a little bit more? Because I think there's
Totally.
there's a ton of value in that.
Yeah, we'll either regret our decisions or we'll validate ourselves in our decisions.
Ooh,
And then that's
that's
where it
good.
gets tricky, right? Because
That's
our
good.
minds, we just start freaking justifying it because we don't want to feel the shame or the guilt or the regret,
Yeah, you're like, no,
right?
no, no, I needed that toaster oven.
Right? Totally. And you'll keep
Good,
telling
I
yourself
make
that
toast.
story. And it's the
Yeah.
same thing. What we like continually tell ourselves, we will start believing eventually. So that's why we have to be very careful with the stories that are in our head. Because if we keep telling ourselves that that toaster oven is like the be all end all and that toaster oven is like $10 million and that toaster oven breaks and then I need to buy another toaster oven, but that's the be all end all. Like you're going to get yourself in trouble just because of the stories you're telling yourself. It's a really dramatic
Yeah.
example, but yeah,
Yeah.
so based off of like where our money is going. So on a lot of the previous episodes we talk about going through your statements, right?
Yeah. Do that.
Um in there like you can see where your money's going, where are you spending your
Hmm.
money? Um,
Yeah.
I know for me, like just thinking of past examples of myself, there was a time in my life where I was experiencing a lot of health issues. I was having a lot of IBS, a lot of digestive stuff. My
Mm.
energy was really crap. I was just emotional, like irritable, moving through a challenging time, And
Yeah.
when you looked at my bank statements, there was a lot of Tim Hortons on there. There was a lot of stopping on my way to work, grabbing a bagel in the morning, having a double
Yeah.
coffee, and just loading myself with sugar and with carbs. And there are certain things in life that we know, and science proves it, that it causes inflammation in the body. Right?
Yeah.
And inflammation causes it in our brains, in our guts, like everywhere, and it wreaks havoc on our ability to actually operate. Right. So when you
Yeah.
looked at my statements, you could easily like look at it and be like, yes, okay, like there is a lot there that can be changed to change this problem that I'm experiencing,
Wow, that's
right?
powerful.
And
Yeah.
so when we look at that, we're like, okay, like where is my energy being channeled right now? And that's just one way
Mhm.
with money, right? So with that, what did I start doing? I started shifting. That was actually when I got into isogenics because my mom, she was kind of going through similar stuff because obviously you learn it somewhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We would always like our family, we would go be going through like we would just be driving. My mom would always joke that the van was Miss Frizzle's bus and that it would automatically stop at every Tim Hortons. Yes, it would automatically stop. And as kids, we were like, no, mom, mom, like, it doesn't just stop at Tim Hortons by itself. She's like, it does. And I was
Dude.
just like, right? But just like these patterns that you pick up, right? And it's like, I learned it somewhere and that's okay, but it's not serving me. I'm having a lot of health issues. I need to start making changes. So that was when my mom, she was starting to receive really amazing benefits by incorporating the Eastern, like the Ayurvedic herbs and getting more nutrients in and all of these things. And after learning, going down that rabbit hole, it was like our soil's depleted. The food actually doesn't have as much nutrients. So
For
like
real.
the thing is an amazing thing. And I still do it to this day. Right. But I didn't know anything about supplementing. So I started investing
Yeah.
money into supplements and like
Yeah.
starting to kind of go down that route of like, let's try this. And it started making me feel better. I started doing liver
Yeah.
cleanses. I started doing kidney cleanses, like to just like revamp my body and get it back. I started cutting back
Yeah.
on sugar. I started like kind of making those changes. And then all of a sudden, guess what else changed? When I looked at my bills, my credit
Yeah.
card statements or my debit statements, there was
Yeah.
not as much Tim Hortons on there. And there
Right.
was way more of like the stuff that was bringing me to where I actually wanted to
Yeah.
go. So that's just like the reassessment, right? Like when we
Yeah.
realize that we aren't getting where we want to go, there has to be a reassessment of our values. And that's one way you
Mhm.
can do it, like take a peek at where your time, your energy is going right now. And is this a place that's going to get me to where I want to go, or is it holding me back? Sometimes it can be
Yeah.
that simple, you know?
It's really interesting to use that analogy with your bank statements or your credit card statements or whatever that looks like, because we hear it all the time is like if you're watching Netflix and but you want to be a business owner like
Totally.
your time is like audit your time.
Yeah.
What I did for a while actually during COVID is I like a 15-minute schedule. I know some people think that's insane, but for me is I'm like if I have a half-hour schedule and I had something that was only 10 minutes, I'm wasting 20 minutes,
Mm.
right? And so I found like a 15-minute schedule allowed me to not waste. I'm like, well, if something was 10 minutes, I'm only wasting 5 minutes, right? And so auditing your time can be so valuable. And one thing that I did personally for this was like, I used to write down what I did every 15 minutes. It's a lot easier. Like if you're working, you're like, you just put it in. Like your free time is obviously a little bit different, but I think just like having that inventory, like using a calendar like a bank statement in that way, because you can learn your values from your what you're doing with your time. Or like I honestly somebody said this to me and it's like it stuck so hard. It's like paying attention. You
Mhm.
pay with your attention,
Yeah.
right?
I can't
And
believe
so
I've
it's
never heard
like
that before.
isn't that crazy? I'm like, oh yeah, that's probably where this came from. But it's like what you put your attention on, that's like your currency.
Totally.
And so knowing like, do your values line up? Like if you want to watch The Office and that's what your values are, go watch The Office, and get some
Yeah.
endorphins or like you're gonna get some joy from that. But like if you want to also be, $1 million earner, watching The Office 4 hours a day might not get you there. And I'm not
Mhm.
telling you like this is what's right and this is what's wrong, but it's just like figuring out what works for you. Because
Yeah.
personally, I know if I did that, I wouldn't be able to get to where I am.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, it
yeah,
really is that personal assessment of like just being honest with yourself.
yeah,
Like being honest
definitely.
with yourself with where you're spending your time that's not serving you. Cause I know I kind of went through a phase where it was like, I was like super into the high performance stuff. And I was like, go, go,
Mm,
go, 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 cut out all the TV, cut out all of this stuff. And then my nervous system was still just as whacked as before.
right.
So then I had to swing the other way where then I went like completely the opposite way of like, I'm not going to do all of that hardcore masculine type stuff, but I'm going to go feminine. I'm going to be doing yoga. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to be
Yeah.
out in nature, but then I didn't get shit done.
Yeah.
Right. So now it's like, okay, like how could we merge these two,
It's
Laura? How could you be
balance.
the eagle and the condor and come together and do
Yeah.
this? And it's like, like if Netflix is a downtime that allows you to do it, like right now, I was sharing this with you that Danny loves watching Netflix more than I do in the evenings. And I've
Mm,
allowed myself to surrender to it and watch it. And I actually enjoy it because it's like,
yeah.
like it allows me to shut off and like look at something fairly useless for a while.
Yeah.
To be completely honest. It's
Yeah.
like shit that doesn't really matter. These are made up
Yeah.
stories. They're whatever. Sometimes we watch documentaries and stuff like that too, which I do find very
Yeah.
interesting, and like even
Of
history
course.
type stuff. Like I love learning about that stuff. But for the
Yeah.
most part, like it allows me to kind of shut off from the more important things in my business and life and all of these other things. So it's like really is
Yeah.
like it's that personal going within for us to just be honest with ourselves of like what's serving us and what's not. And I'm sure we can go into this. We were
Yeah.
actually talking about this before about kind of like where we swing both ways on on the next money mindset one that we go into. Um,
Yeah, and so that actually brings me to what I'd love to hear next is what's the actionable items for people to kind of take this inventory or get a good handle on the balance? Like, what do I need to do to create this balance in my life? Like, what are the steps that I can take to do that? What's my homework,
yeah.
Laura?
Your homework, Kristen. I have an awakened success guide that I
Oh,
would love
so
to
good.
share in the comments or in the description with you all. It's free. You just put in your email, it'll get sent straight to your inbox. And in there is a guide that walks you through basically a big old self-awareness checklist kind of thing where you're going to be answering a bunch of questions to just have a greater understanding of the way that you're showing up and the way that you want to show up, and then
Yeah.
finding the gaps in there so that you can start merging it and starting to shift your life in a way that actually feels good, right? Because that's the main thing. That's the whole thing with the awakened success is it's like this isn't just the like must create success at all costs.
Yeah.
It's like how can we do this in a way
Yeah.
that actually feels good? So I'll put
Yeah.
that in the description for everybody so you guys can access that, and it's awesome. It just really helps you to just have greater awareness around where you're at, what you're already doing well, because we can't forget about that. Because if you're a high performer, high achiever, sometimes we can forget to celebrate ourselves for what we're
Yeah.
already doing good. And it
Accurate.
also gets you to kind of focus on that bigger vision that you have as well, and then has some questions to really help you to bring it all together so that it's
Mm.
really going to provide you with those action steps. And in that too, we are hosting free monthly workshops you can hop on as well.
Oh,
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, so you
Yeah.
kind of like if you want to hop on to the workshops, if you want to do the guide on your own, you can. There's kind of lots of different options for that. So we'll put that in the comments.
Uh, that's incredible. Well, I honestly I really appreciate everything you shared today because like I said, I see it all the time in my clients where their values or what they tell me are their values and their habits
Yeah.
like don't align and we just want so much for our clients and sometimes I say I'm like I can't care more about your finances than you do.
100%.
And
Yeah, it's totally
sometimes it
true.
feels that way, right? And so I think this is so valuable for people to be able to take an inventory of where their values are based off of their time or their statements and creating that balance like you said
Mhm.
because without that balance you're just not gonna be where you want to be like even like you said with Danny is taking that time to maybe mellow down and watch TV like that's creating a balance because you're go 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 all the time
Yeah.
and so it's really interesting. I'd love to hear in the comments what are those balances for people? Maybe something like a tip or a trick that they have to help keep that balance in their life,
Mhm.
whether it's meditation or yoga. I know if I don't do a meditation or yoga, I'm like all crazy. I'm
Yeah.
like my thoughts are all over the place. It really helps to ground me. So I'd love to hear in the comments like what your tricks are and what you get from the guide because I know that there's going to be so many amazing questions that is really going to open things up for you. So thank you everyone so much. And thank you, Laura. Like I said, I have been waiting for this episode. I am
I could
just
go
so
forever on these.
excited,
I'm like,
right? And we'll save it for the next one. There's gonna definitely be more money conversations around mindset because without having the right mindset, you're not gonna be able to reach your financial goals because money, I always tell people it's very numerical and logical, but it's so emotional. So
mhm.
emotional.
Mhm.
So, thank you everyone for taking the time to join us on this episode. And I'd love to hear what you got from this. Next week, we're going to be talking all about the Registered Disability Savings Plan. If you haven't heard about this program, don't count yourself out because so many people qualify for it and they don't know about it. So I am stoked to share the ins and outs of that because I know there's a ton of financial coaches who won't touch this and it's so valuable. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more. And just, I love if you could subscribe and follow for more. Watch some of the past episodes. Like Laura said, we have dived into so many different topics and we have a ton of stuff planned. We plan to do one episode, and this has turned into